Hi guys, Cheshire here. Welcome to this module which is about Active Directory. Active Directory is the most important component of Microsoft infrastructure, and it is definitely not an overstatement. Just answer one question. What do you think is the most important thing on our planet Earth? Well, if you think it is all the cars and all the money and all the buildings or anything else, well, I'm sure you don't think that, but I'm just putting it out. Then it's not, because it's people. Everything which happen around you is either for people to eat, or is either for people to use, or is for people to watch. But everything that happens on this planet Earth is for its people to use. An Active Directory is the identity of those peoples in computing system. It's what define you and your rights in IT world. The Active Directory structure of an organization is an exact replica of its business bifurcation. You are going to learn this more over the modules of this week, that how much Active Directory resembles the people inside an organization, and the various components of Active Directory resembles the various divisions within an organization, and the groups and the departments within an organization. Nicely designed Active Directory is a complete mirror reflection of how an organization functions as a business. You can look at an Active Directory to identify who is who in the organization. Being an expert in Active Directory alone is a specialization in infrastructure world, and people get paid a lot of money for being that expert. Prepare to get amazed, guys. This is an amazing module. So here's what we are going to cover in this module. We are going to talk about what is Active Directory. We're going to talk about Active Directory forest and domain, which are the building blocks of Active Directory. We are going to talk about the trust which exists between these forest and domains. We're going to do the installation of our very first domain controller. I'm going to show you the Active Directory consoles which we use in our day-to-day life. I'm going to also show you the containers within Active Directory users and computers. This is one of the consoles which I'm going to show you, and this is honestly the most used console in Active Directory. So I'm going to walk you through the various containers which are present in it. Then we are going to talk about the users and groups which gets created within Active Directory. And then we are going to talk about the Active Directory DNS, which is the building block of Active Directory and one of the most important component. All right, so let's begin. What is Active Directory? Just a Google definition, Active Directory is the directory services developed by Microsoft for Windows Domain Network. It's included in most Windows Server operating system as a set of processes and services. Initially, Active Directory was only in charge of centralized domain management. Okay, that's just a Google definition. Microsoft Active Directory is the directory services which is created by Microsoft. It is used by 99.9% organizations across the globe. In fact, I have not heard of any large organization which do not have Active Directory. Pretty much all of them have it. Very important piece of information, the Active Directory protocol which is used, that is called as the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or the LDAP protocol. So this is a question which gets asked in the interviews a lot, that what is the protocol which Active Directory uses, and the answer for that is LDAP. And the port number for LDAP is 389. Again, if you go back to week 2, I've talked about the common ports which are used by various services. So if you refer to that table, I am sure you will find the LDAP port number listed there as port 389. And when the LDAP is over a secure certificate or LDAP S, then it is on port number 636. Don't quote me on that. You can go ahead and double check on the port number, but I'm pretty sure that this should be correct, 389 and 636 for LDAP over SSL. And in plain language, Active Directory is just a database of all the users and computers which gets created in your organization, and you use Active Directory for controlling it, controlling the authentication which is happening in the organization to access the resources. Pretty much everything which you can think of by the time you get inside the organization and put your access card on the access card reader. That also goes into Active Directory to authenticate if configured. When you give a printout and you go to the big A3 printer, which we have spoken about before, and you tap your access card and you get the printout, that's when Active Directory authentication is happening. In fact, the address book on the printer give you an option to synchronize the address book with the Active Directory. This way, whatever users are created in your Active Directory, all their information gets synchronized in printer, and you don't have to manually create the address book there. In fact, all the user information gets picked up from Active Directory once again. So Active Directory is the centralized repository where all the users and computers are present, and you can have a lot of fun with them, and you can put a lot of control on them. Okay. Active Directory, forest, and domain. It's definitely not like the forest which is shown before in this photograph. So let's look at the definition. A domain is defined as a logical group of network objects, computer, user, and devices that share the same Active Directory database. A tree is a collection of one or more domains, and domain trees in contiguous namespaces is linked to a transitive trust hierarchy. At the top of this structure is called as a forest. Okay, it's a very complicated definition. I would like to simplify it a bit more. So you see here this blue.com and this triangle. This is one domain. This sales.blue.com is another domain. Maybe the circles, you can believe that they are a domain controller, although this image doesn't say so, but I would say that they are a domain controller. So this has one domain controller, this has one domain controller. This pr.blue.com is another domain. This is a domain controller, this is a domain controller. On this other side, red.com is a domain, and then it has a child domain called as accounts.red.com, and then it has another child domain which is engineering.red.com. One domain controller, one domain controller, one domain controller. Okay, so in this current situation, this is a domain controller. I beg your pardon there. This is a domain, this is a domain, this is a domain. This tree structure which is created here is called as a domain tree. Again, this is a domain, this is a domain, this is a domain. This structure here is called as a domain tree. And if you put a wrapper around this whole thing, then this whole containment, like this wrapper inside which all these domains are present, will be called as a forest. However, this image here calls this top level as a forest, and technically that is correct, but for the understanding, you need to understand that there is a wrapper around, a logical wrapper around all these domains, and that is putting them in a forest. It will become more and more clear to you as you go through further in this training and in your life. Now, just going to tell you a bit more about forest and domain, and that's going to again clarify your understanding of them. So, like I mentioned probably during the introduction of this module or the week 3, that AD reflects the true hierarchy of organization. And I want to give you a live example of organization where I have worked. I'm not going to use the name of that organization, but there is an organization where I've worked. It's a big telecom group. So in this organization, how their business was divided was that the organization was an Indian organization, and they had, of course, business in India, and then they have business in Sri Lanka as well. This was their primary business. And then later their businesses further evolved even more, and they created more and more businesses which were about realty, and it was about retail. They opened some stores and malls, and then they started putting up some towers, the mobile phone towers kind of a business. So these were the various kind of businesses these people were in. So the other side of the businesses came up later, but they started with the core telecom business, which is shown on this left hand side here. So what was there in that business was, of course, as a company, The head office was in India, and then there was India business, which was under that head office, and then there was another Sri Lanka business, which was under the same head office. So, how their Active Directory was created was that they created one forest, because whatever the business is, whether it is head office or whether it is India business or whether it is Sri Lanka business, ultimately all of that is part of the same company. So it becomes part of the same forest. A forest represents a company. Inside the company, they went ahead and created the root domain, the first domain. And this domain was the representation of their India head office. Then there were people, resources, systems which were hired, made, buildings, offices which were made dedicated to the India telecom business. So all these people and resources, they were put inside a child domain of the parent organization. So tel.com is the parent organization, and they created a child domain in India, and it is called as india.tel.com. So everybody who belonged to head office and who was responsible for both the businesses were created here in the root, and everybody who was responsible for the India business, they were inside this domain. All their computers were joined to this domain, all their users were created in this domain. You are going to learn about how we create users and computers and all these things. They will become clear, but as of now, just think about a logical grouping. So all the users were created in this domain, and all the computers were put in this domain for India business. All the users were put in this domain for Sri Lanka business. All the computers were put in this domain for Sri Lanka business. And all the people who were responsible for the overall hierarchy and management of business were here in this parent domain. So this is how their actual organization was, and this is how their Active Directory structure was. Technically, they could have created everything here, but that would have been wrong, because then there would have been no bifurcation to see that who belongs to what organization and how the business is subdivided. Active Directory is an exact reflection of how the actual business is. Later, when their business was doing very well, they went ahead and got into other type of businesses as well. And in the initial years when this all was created, they didn't think about that they would be going to another type of business. So later, instead of uh, getting all these businesses under the telecom domain, because uh, TEL used to represent telecom, and these businesses which they tried to do later, they had nothing to do with telecom domain. So what they made was their company name .group.com. That's the Active Directory domain which they made, and all the people, higher up people who were overall responsible for all these businesses, their accounts were created in this domain. And then they started offices, businesses, hiring people, computer and resources for the reality part of their business. The company which was dealing in building buildings or getting huge real estate infrastructure, acquiring more and more land, that was called as the realty group. And they created an Active Directory domain for them, realty.group.com. Then they were also involved into supply of the FMCG articles, and they made some kind of stores, big departmental stores, and this was called as the retail part of their business, and the name of the company was retail.group.com, and the domain created was the child domain to the group.com, which was retail.group.com. And then finally they also set up, because they were a telecom company, they later got involved into the business of setting up mobile towers, and they set up a company which was once again can't give you the real name of the company. It was so they created a company named Tower, and they created the domain here tower.group.com. Ultimately, what's happening here is that they are reflecting that this is the parent company and all these businesses are under it, and that's how the all the users were created as well. All the people who used to belong to the leadership team and the people who used to be overall responsible for the running of these businesses, they were in the root domain. And the people who were responsible for the individual businesses or who were part of individual, the one of these sub businesses, they used to be part of these domains. So there was as simple as that. And honestly speaking, in a later time, this was a plan that this domain actually has to be migrated under here. Now I'm talking about Active Directory migration because logically they went ahead and initially created thinking that they will remain in telecom. They named their root domain as this and they created the child domains as this. But later the business evolved into a different direction, and they could not have added the realty under telecom, and they could not have added retail under telecom because that's not how their organization was structured. But the group also owned telecom, so ideally it made sense that the telecom could have come under the group. And as far as the organization internal structure was concerned, that happened quite long ago, that telecom came under the group.com. But this Active Directory structure was very old, and this was the biggest profitable business. And this was telecom is like a huge dependency on IT infrastructure, and any change which needed to happen here was like a huge project. So they wanted that this domain should also come under group.com so that it can reflect the actual hierarchy of the organization. And I believe they might have done it by now, because by the time I was in that organization, this was something which was on the cards. We didn't start that project by the time because we were busy in other acquisitions and other things which we were doing at that time. But I believe eventually they would have done it if they have not done it already. So I hope you understand now the concept of forest and domain. Forest is the overall logical thing. I would explain you one more thing here. This triangle represents a domain. Okay. This circle represents a forest. And this box inside this triangle is representing the domain controller. Now, in all the words which I have used here, the domain controller is the only physical thing. Domain controller is a server which you can go and touch. But as far as the domain is concerned and the forest is concerned, it is just a logical concept. The concept exists, and when you go ahead and set up your domain controller, so you don't go ahead and set up your forest. Because ideally speaking, if somebody asks me how to do this thing, I would say that first you have to set up the forest, then you have to set up the domain, and then you will be setting up the domain controller. But the fact is that there is nothing to set up in a forest and there is nothing to set up in a domain. You actually start setting up your first domain controller, and that's when you define the forest and that's when you define the domain. When we will install our first domain controller, this will become more and more clearer. But as of now, I want you to understand what is a domain, what is a forest, and how logical is the concepts of forest and domain, and how physical is the actual domain controller. Now I want to talk about something which is called as a domain and forest trust. Active Directory trust can be created between Active Directory domains and Active Directory forest. A trust allows you to maintain a relationship between two domains to ensure resources in the domains can be accessed by users. Okay, so just read the definition again. Active Directory trust can be created between Active Directory domains and Active Directory forest. The trust allow you to maintain a relationship between the two domains to ensure the resources can be accessed by the users. Basically, each of the resources can be accessed by a user. Let's assume that there are two companies. I run a business where I manufacture tires and I have a factory. Next door to me, there is another factory, and this guy is in a business of manufacturing noodles, okay, Maggi noodles. These two organizations, we become close friends, we used to see each other, and we see some kind of a correlation between us. We feel like that these businesses are related to each other. I'm sorry I chose the worst example possible, Tire and Maggie. Maybe we could have chosen something else like Maggie and a floor business or something else. But these are two businesses, okay? Sorry for that example, but these are two businesses, and these two businesses decide that there is a correlation which can exist between them, which can help them to grow further. Now, these two businesses, they decide to work with each other, or one of the business owner buys the other business, or they get into a common partnership, or whatever could be the way in which they structure their business financially. The end result is that these two businesses are technically the same businesses now. So what's happening? People who are sitting in office A is also going in office B to do some job, and people who are sitting in office B are also coming to office A to do some job. Or let me say this, technically, now there exists a trust between these two offices. That people from office A are allowed to go in the office B, and people from office B are allowed to come into office A. This trust, how did it got created? Because the ownership of the company got merged. The owners of the company became friend, and they told the employees of the company to become friend with the employees of the other company, and they all decided to start working with each other. Now, like I was explaining to you before, that a business is actually a forest. So these two companies, let's assume that these two are different companies, the company A and company B, and they had multiple domains within them, like multiple business within them. Or for the sake of this example, let's just consider that there is one domain in the company A, and there is one domain in the company B. And now what happened that people from company A to company B, they can go in each other office. But how are they going to access the resource? Because ultimately, a company is its Active Directory. All the users gets created in Active Directory. All the resources are added in Active Directory. So how these people are going to access the resources of each other company? The Active Directory needs to be told that there is a trust between these two companies. And this trust is the real trust which I am talking about here. Two Active Directories, there is a concept which is called as a forest trust. A trust can be created between two forests, two Active Directories, two domains, using which the users from this domain can access the resources, let's say a printer, in this domain. Or when the user from this organization come to this organization, he can access the resources here. So this is what a trust is. Let's read the definition again. Active Directory trust can be created between two Active Directory domains or forest. That's what I said. And allows you to maintain a relationship between two domains or forest to ensure resources in this domain can be accessed by the users of the other domain. Okay? So what kind of trust exists? Well, there is a forest-wide trust. There is a interforest trust is forest-wide trust actually. That's the same thing. Then there exists a tree root trust. There exists a parent-child trust. There exists a two-way trust, and there exists a one-way trust. I know this is confusing. Let's go back to this uh, same image which we have been working on. In this image, I have named the trust here. So let's assume this is company A, and this was the root domain. The original company creation happened here, and this was the root domain. And then later they bifurcated into the India business in a different domain, and the Sri Lanka business in a different domain. So this domain is a child domain of the root domain. The first domain of a forest is called as the root domain. So this root domain and this is a child domain. Again, this is a root domain and this is a child domain. The trust between which exists between these two domains is called as a parent-child trust. This is a parent-child trust. This is a parent-child trust. And let's assume that we create another domain within this forest, which is technically, let's say that this business is for mobility. Now, this guy started another business for making shoes. I'm really versed at examples here. Sorry. So this guy started doing another business about making shoe, and he did not want to put it as a child domain here because that doesn't make any sense. The shoes have nothing to do with telecom. So he still wanted it to be in the same trusted forest under the same umbrella of the company. So he created altogether a different domain here. The name of this domain could be shoes.com, and he started building up the shoes business here. Later, if he'll feel he will, and if he goes into multiple countries, he can set up india.shoes.com, srilanka.shoes.com, australia.shoes.com, or whatever he wants to do with the child domains in future. But he created a company, the same owner created another company within the same forest. And by default, this owner trusts this company because it's his company. And these people should also trust this company because ultimately this is the owner's company. And this domain should trust, or this business should trust them and them and them because ultimately they are the same owner business. So when you create a domain like this, which has nothing to do with the parent name, if its name would have been shoe.tel.com, then it would have been called as a child domain. But when its name is entirely different and it doesn't have tel.com in it, then it is called as a sister domain. So shoes.com is a sister domain to this, and this is a parent-child trust, this is a parent-child trust, this is a tree root trust, the trust which exists between these two domains. And this trust is created by default. You don't have to create it, because even in a business, when a business owner creates multiple businesses, it is expected that these businesses are going to trust each other. They belong ultimately to the same business interest or the business interest of the same person. So these trusts are created by default. And this trust is also created by default. Once again, when I will go into the creation of the Active Directory, you will see these things more clearly. As of now, just try to understand them as a concept. Okay. So I explained to you parent-child trust. I explained to you tree root trust. This is another business, the neighbor. This has nothing to do with this business until today. And this is ran by a separate owner. This is ran by a separate owner. This domain, this is a parent-child trust, parent-child trust, parent-child trust, which means this domain trusts this, trusts this, trusts this. This domain trusts this domain trusts this, and they all trust each other because they are part of the same business group. Now the owner A and owner B, they became friend, or maybe owner A bought the business of owner B. For whatever reasons, these two companies decided to merge with each other. It happens every now and then, and in fact very often in the business world, that one company buys another company. And then what happens is, as the first thing, these people, as soon as this guy bought this company, these leadership people will start visiting this company. They will start looking into how to make this company profitable. And when they have to do this, what will they do when they come to their office? How will they give a printout from their printer? How will they use the projector? How will they get inside the building? Because this Active Directory doesn't know anything about them. So an easier option would be just go ahead and create some user account for these guys here. But then their computer, will you give them a separate computer as well? Try giving that to a VIP user, that when you go to office A, you use this computer, and when you go to office B, you use this computer. He's not going to look at you very kindly. So the solution is that you create a trust, and this trust do not exist, because this trust do not exist in real world as well. Two companies don't trust each other. They will never trust each other. They only started trusting each other for a reason, usually financial. So you go ahead and create a trust between two forests. The circle represents a forest. So you create a trust between these two forests through your Active Directory consoles. I will show you how that happens. And this is called as a forest root trust. Okay? So you have a forest wide trust or forest root trust. Then you have a tree root trust. I told you there is a parent-child trust, and there is something which is called as a two-way trust or a one-way trust. Let me explain that to you. So there would be certain situations where what happens is that maybe this owner bought this business. So the people from this company can go here and use whatever. But they don't want these people to come to their company as yet or access their resources as yet. So what they will do is they'll create a one-way trust. As of now, this is a two-way trust. This for business B trusts business A trusts business B. But maybe business A bought business B. They want to go inside business B, but they don't want the business B to come inside business A. So instead of creating a two-way trust, they will create a one-way trust where only business B trusts business A. The business A would not trust the business B users and they would not allow them inside their organization or to access their resources. So that is called as a one-way trust. There is exist another concept when you are creating trust. There is a checkbox there which says transitive trust or non-transitive trust. So by default, when you create a trust, the trust get created between the two root domains, like this domain and this domain, because these are the only physical or the this domain controller, root domain controller, and this root domain controller. So the trust get created between them. And once the trust is created, if it is a transitive trust, then that means that because this domain trusts this domain, and this domain trusts this domain, and this domain trusts this domain, hence this domain trusts this domain. This is called as a transitive trust. Once again, if you created a trust between these two domains, now this domain trusts this domain and this domain trusts this domain, there already existed a parent-child trust between this domain and this domain. And there already existed a parent-child trust between this domain and this domain. Hence, this domain now trusts this domain. This is called as a transitive trust. While creating trust, you get an option whether you want to create it transitive or non-transitive. If you create it as non-transitive trust, that means this domain will trust this domain and this domain will trust this domain. But this domain will not trust this domain, or this domain will not trust this domain, or this domain will not trust this domain. So basically, it is a mutually exclusive trust between these two domains. And there is no transition of the trust. Too much information. Read more about it, learn more about it. Hopefully, in the next coming sections, you will get a better grasp on it. Just try to remember what I have told you. Let's go back to our favorite business. I gave you some fundamentals of Active Directory. Now I want you to go back to the business, Contoso, where Sam and Rita are struggling. And this is about Contoso identity crisis and installation of the first domain controller. So Contoso was facing issues like below in absence of a centralized identity solution. Remember, Ravi was unable to use other empty PC just because his local user was created on a PC which is still being used by John. And there was no security in file server because of which everyone can see everyone else's data and can delete everyone else's data. It was a huge threat. And to resolve these issues, the IT company has suggested to install an Active Directory server in the domain and join all the client PCs to that Active Directory server. So, I think this is the time that we install our first Active Directory domain controller, and then we go ahead and join our client computers to it and just have a look. How does it look like? Okay, so here is what we are going to do. We'll quickly going to uh, leave this training here, and then we are going to go back to my Azure. So what I've done here is I created a couple of servers. I created a server which is going to be my first domain controller. I also created a server which is going to be my file server, and this is a Windows 10 machine which is going to represent my client computer. So now what we are going to do is that we are going to install our first domain controller, and that's going to be exciting. So let's see what's happening. I just rebooted this machine. Did you see that I keep them off so that it doesn't spend money? And because I deallocated it, now I have to copy the IP to reconnect to it. And I will go ahead and edit the IP here, because every time when you deallocate the machine, next time the IP which you get could be different. So, okay, so I'm just going to my PTC. All right, so this is the installation of the first domain controller. The first thing which I want to show you is the version of the Windows. So this is a Windows Server 2012 R2 server, and this is going to be our first domain controller. So in the good old days, the most famous command to promote an Active Directory domain controller used to be DC promo. Like, DC promo is definitely a word which you will hear a lot from Active Directory guys, because we have been using this word a lot. Basically, domain controller promotion. That's what DC promo stands for. However, it doesn't work like that anymore. So since Windows Server 2008 onwards, we got this concept of installing the roles and extracting the binaries on a computer before you can install any kind of service. And this is the same thing which I have shown to you before by going into manage here, and then you go add roles and features on this computer. So before 2012 server, actually, when you used to do DC promo, it automatically used to install the binaries and do the stuff for you, or maybe you had to do the binaries first and then you can do DC promo. I don't remember it. I haven't promoted a domain controller for a very long time, but that's not the something which we really need to worry about. The main thing which you have to understand is that until before it used to be DC promo, and now we have to do it from add roles and features. So what we do is we go next, we select role-based installation, we select the server. This is my server. See, the second option is Active Directory Domain Services. So you say yes to this, then you say next, then you say next, then you say next, and then you say restart if required, or you can also not check it, and in that case the visit will get completed and it will then ask you that I want to reboot, and then it will be up to you whether you want to reboot or not. Alright, so the feature installation finished and it didn't ask to reboot, and I'll say close. You see there is an exclamation here, so we'll go to this. Now it is giving me a message that configuration is required, because what has happened here is, technically you can imagine that it's a software which we need to install on this server. So it downloaded those files from somewhere. Actually, these files were not downloaded. These files were kept on the server already in a compressed format. What they have done is that they have extracted all those files and they are ready to be installed as a software now. And this message here is what it is asking me to go ahead and promote this server as a domain controller. So let's go ahead and do it. So these are some very interesting options and you should familiarize yourself with them. Do we already have a domain or a forest? No. This is our first domain controller. So if this had been a domain controller in an existing domain, we could have selected the option add domain controller in an existing domain, which we'll do later. Or if this had been a new domain controller, but a domain controller in an existing forest. So let me show you here. So if this had been a situation that the forest already existed, the first domain already existed, but you were promoting the second domain, first domain controller, in that case, you would have selected an option, add a new domain to the existing forest, because this forest already exists. And what is the name of this forest? The same name as the first domain, which is tel.com. So the forest already existed. Now, that's also not the case because we don't even have a forest. What we are going to do, we are creating a brand new forest. Alright, So let's go ahead and name this domain as firstforest.com. So you really have to be very careful with this name. These are not the folder names or file names that you can right click and rename. The decision on these names need to be taken by the business very carefully, and they should be agreeing to the name, because if you set up your domain and forest and you use it for say couple of years, you have created all the resources inside it, and then one fine day, and it happens quite a lot, the business says that we don't like the name, then these businesses have to spend a lot of money, because it's not a right click rename operation. This is a very difficult operation which usually results in an Active Directory migration, which technically means that we create a brand new forest, brand new domain somewhere, and then we migrate all the user accounts from the existing domain to this new domain. It's very expensive work. So usually the root domain should be something which you would like to call your business, because this is not only your forest name, this is also your root domain name. Or rather, this is not only your root domain name, this is also your forest name. So I would just call it root.com or rootdomain.com, because this will help us in learning and keeping track of things. So this is our root domain, and our forest name is also rootdomain.com now. Okay. Forest functional level and domain functional level. I'm going to talk about them later, because you need to understand schema, which I haven't explained yet. So once I explain the schema, then I'll talk about it. Once again, you can choose them to be same as 2008 R2, and honestly, even if you uh, reduce it to something else, they will be all right. Okay, so specified domain controller capability. Yes, we are going to install DNS server on it. This is the first domain controller. This is going to be a global catalog as well. Once again, global catalog is something which I need to explain to you later. So for now, just leave it here. Okay, so directory services restore mode password. This is like a safe mode for Active Directory, which is used for restoring any deleted objects from Active Directory using a backup. We may talk about it more later. For now, you just have to provide a password, and this password you need to write it down and put it safely somewhere, because when things go south, directory services restore mode, you need to reboot the server into that and log in, and at that time this password is very important, so you have to keep this password with you. Just uncheck this box. So the name which we gave, that was rootdomain.com, is like a full name, or it is called as a fully qualified domain name. And this is just the first name of the domain, so root domain. And this is called as a NetBIOS name. Active Directory is ultimately a database which contains a lot of information about your users and groups and computers. So this is the path of the database where it will be created, and you can change this path now. You can also change this path later, but not something very convenient and not something very smart to do. So when you are setting up your domain controller, you should very well decide where is your NTDS path are going to be and set those paths correctly right now. Okay, this is just a review. What's going to happen? You say next. This is doing a prerequisite check to see if my server is capable of becoming a domain controller. All right, so what this is saying is this is okay, NT security. But what this is saying here is that my one of the physical adapter does not have a static IP, and it needs to be assigned a static IP. Otherwise, uh, otherwise that's not recommended. See, the point is that your domain controller needs to have a static IP. A domain controller is a resource on which a lot of machines will be pointing to for authentication. And if this domain controller keeps changing its IP address, then that's not something correct. So usually on a physical domain controller, why it is able to spot that is because if this has been a physical domain controller, what we should have done was that we should have gone into the properties here, and where it says obtain IP address automatically, this is obtaining the IP address from DHCP server. This should not be like this. This should be set on obtain following IP address. In a normal scenario, we would have just go ahead and put the static IP address here. But unfortunately, these machines are in Azure. And in Azure, I shouldn't be putting the IP addresses here because that confuses Azure. So all the static assignments needs to be done from the Azure control panel. So what I'll try to do is I will go into this, my networking, and I will try to go into my network interface. And I'm going to set the IP address static here. Okay, so now this is going to make it static, although my machine is not going to understand that because it will still see that this is set to automatic. So as far as the machine is concerned, it will believe that the IP is going to change all the time. But it is just a warning message. It's not an error message which is going to prevent me. And as I shown it to you, I have already taken care of the problem by giving a static IP to this machine. So I will go ahead and click on install. It's talking about a weaker cryptographic algorithm which is there on this PC, and I will go ahead and ignore that. And in fact, the installation is already going on, so I just need to wait it out. So it's installing DNS on my computer. Configuring local computer. All right. So that server got successfully configured as a domain controller, and the first thing which it did after getting configured was that it got rebooted. So we are going to wait for that server to come back up, and let's go to my virtual machines, and let's go here, and let's go to boot diagnostics. Let's see if it can show me the screenshot of the machine here. So this is the way how you look at your virtual machines when they are rebooting, because we are not in front of these machines. We don't know what they are doing. And if they get stuck in reboot or some other place, the only way for us to look at is via this console. This is a recently created machine. It needs to configure boot diagnostic. When I click on this for the first time, maybe it's not done yet. So just waiting for it. Okay, I believe the server should be back up, so I'll just go ahead and try to log into the server. Okay, it's not back up. Okay, see? Now I can see what's happening to the server, so that's cool. Alright, so the server is finally back up after the installation. Let's go ahead and try to log into it. Okay. Server Manager popped up by itself. Might be finishing up a bit of installation. You see, there are new roles here. You can see ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, DNS Server. All these options have started to show up. One more thing which I want to show you. Remember the local users and computers? As soon as you make a server a domain controller, there is nothing called as local users anymore. You cannot create local users on a domain controller. The local SAM get disabled. The only way to create local users on this computer now is that you have to uninstall Active Directory from it. And the admin account which was there on this computer before you promote it as a domain controller, that became the password of the first account which got created on this computer. And let me show you. Let's just go back to the training quickly and have a look where we are. So we have created our first domain controller. The next thing which we want to do is that we have to join our client to this domain controller. So which means that this is the client PC which we need to join to the domain controller. We'll do that. And for that, we will go ahead and reboot this client machine. Is it on? Is it already on? Okay, now it's not on. So I'm going to start it now. It's a Windows 10 client. So while it's rebooting, let's just go ahead and quickly look at the next part of the training. So I'm going to join the client, but common Active Directory consoles. Active Directory consoles. Okay, so we have installed Active Directory on our server. Now, how do we manage Active Directory? There are three consoles which we use to manage Active Directory. The first one is Active Directory Users and Computers. This is the most used console to manage users, groups, and computers. It has got two views, regular and advanced. I'm going to show you both of them. We also have Active Directory sites and services. So this shows the physical site in your forest. So if you have multiple offices of your organization in India, in Manila, in Philippines, in Sydney, in Los Angeles, then you would see the similar physical sites in your Active Directory. You create them. It's not that they appear on their own, but like I said, that Active Directory is a true reflection of your organization. So if you have offices remotely, you will ideally have sites remotely as well. Active Directory domains and trust. This is the place where you see all those trust which I spoke to you about, the parent-child trust, the tree root trust, or if your company acquires another company and if you have to create a trust with another company's forest, so this is where you create that trust from. ADSI edit .msc. It's an advanced viewer from where you can see all the information shown in above three consoles at attribute level. It's quite complicated and not user friendly in comparison to all the others. So you only go to ADSI edit when you have to do some kind of a troubleshooting work at attribute level. I'm going to show you all of them, don't worry. So let's begin with this. So let me go to Start and Administrative Tools. You see, you have got domains and trust, you have got Active Directory modules for Pro, Active Directory users and computers, and I will go ahead and open this, dsa.msc. This is the Active Directory users and computers. This is where all the containers, these are the containers, various containers. By default, all the computers which you are going to join to this domain, and I'm going to show you shortly how do you do that, will show up here. Your domain controllers of this domain are showing up here. So you only have one domain controller, and it is the PDC. The name of this domain controller is PDC, and that is the primary domain controller. And this domain controller is also a global catalog server. So That's why it is showing up here, and it is in the site default first site name. So this is the first site which gets created by default. So this is where your PDC is. These are foreign security principles. So when your domain has trust with other domains, external forests, uh, then, and if those users are accessing some resources in your company, I will show you how that happens. Then those or such resources or the copy of such user account shows up here. Not something which you really need to know in your day-to-day life, but that's what a for security principle is. Managed service accounts is a new container where you can put service accounts. So let me show you something here. We should have covered this in our desktop troubleshooting as well, but I would just show you here that since Windows XP onwards, um, all the work which happens, all the applications which are there on your computer, this is another troubleshooting console, if I may say. They have a Windows service which is associated with them. Not pretty much all applications, but all the decent applications will have a service associated with them. And one of the way to stop functioning of that application is that you can stop the service, and uh, you can restart the service, or if you want to just restart the application, clear the cache, then you can restart the service here. And what happens is that these services, they also depend on a user account to start and stop. So they run in context of a user account. When they are trying to start, they are accessing some files and folders on this server, and to access the files and folders they need a user right, and to do that they need a user account, and that user account is called as a service account. See here, this is a service account, and when you are installing a lot of these services, it basically asks you for the user account which the service is going to use. Now you can put a regular user account here, but the problem with user account is that their password gets expired based on the password policy. If the password will get expired, then who is going to come here and update that password again? So you have something, a new functionality which is there, which is called as a managed service account. So they have provided a container here for that, and you can create that managed services account in AD, and with that, the password for those service accounts is managed automatically by Active Directory, and you don't have to manage the service accounts manually. So that's what this is about. And then this is the users console. This is by default where all the new users, when you create them, they should be created here. I told you that there is a regular view, and this was the regular view, and there is an advanced view. So advanced view is there. Advanced view get a few more containers. This is called as lost and found. We haven't spoken about Active Directory replication as of now, but we'll talk about it. But when there is an object lost during the Active Directory replication process, that is, it got created on one domain controller, but it didn't get created on other domain controller for any reason, then that packet ends up on the lost and found container. All these other folders, it's usually not of much use. The systems partition again has some troubleshooting information which I don't want to get involved right now into, but we might have to come back here for the password setting containers. And but yeah, primarily from Active Directory point of view, you will be creating your users here by default, and your domain controllers are here, and this is your domain. So this is your Active Directory console. Now there is the user created here. See, this Azure user, this was my built-in user account before on this Windows server. And when this computer got converted into a domain controller, the domain controller automatically picked up that user account and its password, and it created the administrator account for the domain, the default administrator account. And it is with the same password, and I logged in with that same user account. Remember, I showed you how there exists no local users on the server anymore. So there only exist Active Directory users, and this my local user got converted into an Active Directory user. All right. So having said that, this is the domain controller. And computers, where is the computers? Computers is basically the client computers which this domain can join. We have not joined any client computer to this domain yet, and we are going to do it right now because we have to resolve the problem for Ravi so that he can sit on any computer in the organization instead of able to sit on just the computer on which he has a local user account, because we are moving away from local user account and going into Active Directory user account. Okay, so what is the IP address of the server? The IP address is .7, and remember, DNS also got installed on this server. So this server is by default the DNS server for my domain. These are the zones of the domain which got created automatically during the installation of Active Directory. We will go through this DNS console in a later module, but you need to understand that this server is a DNS server, and in order for that any client machine to join this domain, it has to point to this DNS server for name resolution. So what we are going to do here is that we are going to go to our client machine, and this is our Windows 10 machine. It has started to run, and we are going to copy the IP address here. And I also want to look at the networking here, and this is the network interface, the IP configuration. This is still a dynamic one. I don't mind it on a client machine. It can be dynamic on a client machine. Okay. I'll go ahead and take the risk of setting up the DNS IP from the server within the server, within the client machine to my domain controller IP. And I'm going to take that risk because I'm not going to touch the IP configuration of the machine. I'm just going to put the DNS server manually. Okay, you're going to connect to Windows 10 client. All right, so far, if you remember, this is the client PC which I showed to you before, hopefully. And these are the local user accounts which are created on this PC. So now we want to log in with the user accounts which are created in Active Directory. So this machine needs to join the root domain which we have created. And in order to do that, the first thing which we have to do is that we have to point this machine to our domain controller for the name resolution. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go here, I'm going to do this 10.0.0.7, and I say okay, I say okay. Okay, so I lost the connection to the... Alright guys, so like I was saying that you should not probably configure or make any changes to the network card of a Azure VM manually from within the virtual machine, and that's what has happened. I cannot connect to my Windows 10 client anymore. So I'm going to try a bit of a troubleshooting here, and I just wanted to keep you guys with me to see how I'm doing it. So what I've done is that I've come to connection troubleshoot here, and I'm going to say RDP or RDP I'm going to say test connection. Okay, so it couldn't connect, so while it is doing that, I'm going to open another window because I'm not sure if I will leave this window, if it will remain on this screen or if it's going to just stop doing the test. So I'm just opening a new window here, and I want to go to networking, and I'm just saying that if there is a way I can restore the IP configuration. So this is the correct place to add the DNS server. I should have added it here instead of trying to add it from the virtual machine within the console. I'm happy that I showed that to you because it's better that we have a problem here rather than having it in a production environment. Alright, so none of my attempts to get access to the machine is working. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to redeploy the machine. And basically, I just, under support and troubleshooting, I'm going to choose redeploy. So what essentially this is going to do is it's going to remove the hard drive, the VHD file of my machine, and take it to another Hyper-V host, and going to set up the virtual machine there from scratch. Might take a bit of time to do that. I'm hopeful in this redeployment process, the machine should come back up and we should be able to connect to it. The redeployment is still going on. All right, so now we are going to connect to our Windows 10 client so we can join it to the domain. And in any machine which you have to join to the domain, the first step is to point it to itself or to the domain controller for the DNS name resolution. Ideally, you would go into ncpa.cpl and you will go to the properties, and you'll make sure that the machine is pointing to the domain controller. But given that it is an Azure machine, that would not be the correct way to do it because that can cause network disruption to the machine. So the best way to do it would be to go into networking here and then to go into the NEC card and then go to DNS server, and either you can say inherit from virtual network, and or you can go ahead and provide the DNS server here 10.0.0.7 and you save it. Actually, I just would like to validate what is the IP address of my PDC. Yes, it's 7. So I just gave it the IP address of my primary domain controller for DNS name resolution, and I'll go back to my client machine and I will do CMD. That would do IP config all to see the DNS server. Okay, as of now, the DNS server is not showing to be my domain controller. Maybe I'll have to reboot the machine to apply the DNS server. One more thing which I'm going to do is that I'll go to my network and I'm going to update the DNS server in my network as well. So where's my network? Here's my network. And here's my network. And here's my subnet. Ten dot 0.0.0.7. So I updated my DNS server here as well. And let me just go back to the machine and just make sure that the correct DNS server is there. If not, then I'm going to reboot this machine. So cmd. No, it's still showing the incorrect DNS server. So I'll quickly go ahead and reboot this machine, and I will wait for it to get started. Go to my virtual machines. Okay, so it's rebooting. Okay, so the client is back up. Let me go ahead and connect to it. I will once again go ahead and confirm the DNS server. Okay, so the DNS server is my domain controller now. The next thing which I want to do is open a window called as sysdm.cpl. Yep. And this is called as the system properties window. And this is the window which you use to join the machine to a domain. Now, there are various ways to open this window once again, and these ways keeps changing. Earlier it used to be my computer, right click and properties. Now that my computer has gone all together, so there are, you can go to control panel, maybe open it from there. But the bottom line is that if you remember the shortcuts like me, it's always simple to open this, because no matter what version of Windows you are in, sysdm.cpl is always going to remain the same, and this is going to open the system properties. So now this machine currently is in work group, and I'm going to put it in domain. I'm going to put the name of the domain, and I'm going to say OK. It's asking me for the domain admin credentials. In fact, actually, it could be any domain user who can join his machine to the domain. So I should not say that it is a domain admin credential. It is a user credential from the domain to which you want to join. And I am going to use my only user, which is created as of now. And I'm going to say OK. Spinning. Okay, it's already. Welcome to the rootdomain.com, and you say OK, very good. It says you need to restart. We say all right, and we say restart now. It's restarting. All right. Now let's go to the domain controller and see what happened there. So while the machine is rebooting, we'll go to the Active Directory users and computers window, and we are going to refresh this. So far nothing. Okay. So this is the Windows 10 machine which we had as a client, and this is now joined to the domain. So now you can see the machine is showing up in the domain. Isn't it cool? Now this means that any user from this domain can log into that machine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a user account for my favorite guy Ravi, so that if there are 20 client machines joined to this domain, he can log into any of those machines. No, this is a computer account. Sorry guys, I should have chosen user account, new user, and his name is Ravi, and his logon name is Ravi, and say next. User must change the password at next logon. That's one of the options. So whenever you are creating a new user account for a user, you should keep this check so that you can give user a temporary password, and upon the next login, he will be asked to change it to a password which you would know, and that's good for security reason. Or you can set up a password. In some environments you want to say that user cannot change the password because you always want to know the password. If you have a password policy which expires a password in every 90 days or something, and you want the password not to expire for some reason, like I said, the managed service account, which I mentioned before, let's say that you're not using a managed service account and you manually created a user account to be used with the service, and you don't want to worry about its password getting expired and the service getting stopped, so you put a check, password never expire, and this is a check if you want to create the account but you want to keep it disabled. So yeah, I'm just going to keep these passwords. In fact, I'll remove this and I will just go ahead and give it the password. All right. Okay, so I created the user account for Ravi. Now let's go ahead and log into this PC with the user account of Ravi. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put the user account here. I don't want to confuse you, so I'll say ask when required here. So I'm not going to save it before. Okay, it's asking me already. So root domain / Robbie, and then okay, so the Ravi user do not have the remote desktop permission into that machine. So we need to give it some kind of a permission. It's getting a bit technical. What I'll do is I will just add this user to the administrators group, the domain administrators, and domain admins. So I added it to domain admins, and let's see how the zip goes now. And guys, I'm just going to add the user here. So Ravi at rootdomain.com. All right, so we are able to log into the PC now. What happened there was that you need special rights to log in remotely to a PC, and those rights are called as the remote desktop users rights. And because these are all this not an idle situation which we are doing here. We are remoting into a machine. In idle scenario, you'll be just logging onto the machine from the console, from the like you're right in front of the laptop. So just to resolve that issue, what I did temporarily, I just gave Ravi admin rights, and hence he is able to log into this PC. And yeah, so I will go ahead and show you once again that the user which is logged on to the PC right now is, you can already see it here, actually it's Ravi, and you can see that it's rootdomain.com user domain, and username is Ravi, and the user profile is saved in the profile folder, see users Ravi. And I will also show you the local users on this machine, and you can see there is no local user here. Okay, and so this remote desktop users, that's what Ravi need to be added. And remember, I showed this window to you. I told you about the things which are here, the object types, etc. And now see, earlier you only used to see the local PC here. Now this machine has become part of the domain, so you can see the root domain here. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pick up a user from the root domain, that is Ravi. See, it's able to see everything from the root domain. This is not present on this local machine. And I have added the Ravi to remote desktop users. And I did that because I wanted to remove it from the administrators group. And having said that, this is done. And this is done. So you have logged in here. And let me just sign out. And I will go ahead and remove Ravi from domain admins. I'll try to log in again with Ravi. Okay, now this time you are able to log in because I added the user to remote desktop users, and I don't have to make him an administrator anymore. And yeah, so we just created a user, we just joined a machine to our domain, and we can see all that in our Active Directory. And this is the user, this is the computer, and we are in control. We don't have to do it anymore from a local PC. Okay, so let's go back to the training and see where we are. Okay, so I already showed you Active Directory users and computers, and I want to show you uh, the two more consoles. Okay, so once again, the first one was dsa.msc, which is your Active Directory users and computers. I already briefly ran you through this. Now the second one is dssite.msc, which is your Active Directory sites and services. Okay, so this is the sites and services console of your Active Directory, and this is where you see your Active Directory physical sites or your IT infrastructure physical sites. So by default, it creates the first site here because I didn't create anything. Like, there's only the first domain controller which we have installed, and it has to put it under some site. So it creates the default site here and it puts the domain controller there. But ideally, in an environment, you would not see sites named like this. What you would see is that you will add site and you will say the site name like Florida, or maybe even more specific like that than that. You will create a Florida site, or you will create a Sydney site. So these are going to be the sites of your the actual sites of your IT infrastructure, and then you are going to see your domain controllers under these sites. I'm going to explain you the reason why we segregate our domain controller site wise, and in a later module, but this is what basically Active Directory sites and services does. It's not a snap-in which you use very often, because it's not that you're creating sites every day, but Active Directory users and computers actually is the snap-in which you'll use the most. Then the last one is domains.msc. This is the Active Directory domains and trust. Again, a snap-in which you will use very less, because the domains and trust are usually very rare that you acquire a company and that you create an external domain and you create a trust with it. So like you go here, properties. So there's the root domain, it shows the function levels here, we are going to talk about them. And then the domain trusted by this. So this is where you create a trust. So this is company A root domain, and if a company B trusts it, you will see its name here, you will see its name here, and this is how you create a trust. You go through a wizard, and you put the name of the other company, and you go through some wizard and provide some passwords and credentials, and the trust gets created. It's a simple process. As long as the name resolution works fine, DNS works fine, and the whole path between the target domain and this domain is clear, the trust gets created and is managed pretty efficiently. But this is where you see the trust. If we had more domains in the same forest, then also you would have seen the parent-child trust or tree-root trust created here by default. But we don't have any other domain, hence this is blank here. But this is the Active Directory domains and trust, another snap-in which you will use very, 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 very rarely. Okay, now one more snap-in which I want you to see is adsi-edit.msc, and this is the Active Directory console. This is used to connect and have an attribute level lookout of your. So this is once again your Active Directory users and computers, the same computer account temp win10 you can see here. Under users you can see Ravi here. Now as you can see, this is a very non-friendly way of showing the users and the computers, and in fact all of this must be looking very technical to you, and the reason for that is that it is technical, and that just gives you a lot of more control to do stuff which you will not be able to do from there, because this is literally at the attribute level how the things are happening here, and you just come to this console for some very rigorous troubleshooting. But again, with the advent of cloud computing, and I wouldn't say Active Directory is getting reduced a lot, but until you become like a specialist Active Directory engineer, you won't be actually doing much here. Like, once again, no beginners ever get to see even a console like this. So not something which you'll use every day. And if you become that level of engineer, then this will be your backyard and you'll know it very well. We are going to look at this Active Directory ADSI edit console later in this training a little more. But for now, that's what the console is. Okay, going back to the training. So we just looked at the consoles here. Now, I already explained you some of the containers there, but in Active Directory users and computers. But I want to tell you there are two kind of containers in Active Directory users and computers. One of them is just a container, which is used to organize users and computers or any other AD data, and the other ones are organizational units. Organizational units are something on which a group policy object can be applied. Let me just show you here. So once again, I will open dsa.msc, which is my Active Directory users and computer. You see here, this is a container. This is a container. You see, domain controller has like a different icon. It's a folder icon, but then there is a small book kind of icon on it. That's an organizational unit. Now the purpose of all these containers and units is like any folder in a file structure, just to put the data in a more managed way. And okay, so but what happens is, like earlier when I was creating a user account, I went ahead and created it here. That's not how we do it. I told you that Active Directory is a reflection of your whole organization. So what happens is that in an organization, we will go ahead and create a OU, and OU is what you are going to use the most, because on OUs you can attach group policies, and it is very important that you should be able to add group policies. We are going to study group policies later, but it's a core reason that you go for Active Directory. I won't say it's a core reason, but it is one of the coolest feature of Active Directory, and you don't want to create containers on which you can't add group policy, because there is no overhead in creating OU. You are not creating any problems, or there is no other benefit in creating containers. So you'll most likely be creating OUs in most of these situations. So in an ideal organization, how I would see the users would be created, there could be an OU called as users. uh, Actually, there is already a container called as users, so I wouldn't be able to create. So I would say business users. And now under business users, I can create more OUs, which could be sales. I'll create more OU called as accounts. I can create OU called as owners. See how I am segregating the structure. And under these OUs, you can have the users. Let's say that there is this user Ravi and he belongs to the sales team. So let's go ahead and move him to the sales. That was just a message which was saying that you are moving the user and do you want to really move it? So I said yes. So see, I moved Ravi under this OU. I'm just trying to keep, so if there are 5 more guys who join the sales team, I'm going to create their user accounts here and they will come under sales OU. If there are guys who are joining the accounts team, I will create their user accounts here. And that's how you create the OUs, and then you can add group policies on them. I'm not going to show you group policy right now, but for now, just understand that anything without this book is actually just a container and you can't add a group policy to it. And anything with this book is an organizational unit, and both of them are just used to separate the data or put the data in a more systematic way. And by data, I mean users and computers. So, like I created business users, I can also create an OU called as business computers, and these are simply the folders which you create on your file structure to segregate your data. And I can again create OUs underneath it to say sales, and let's say Ravi belongs to the sales team. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and I will pick up his computer from here, and I can drag and drop it. That's not a good practice because that's what we learned in Microsoft, that while doing this you can actually drop the object, and if it is a huge complicated Active Directory with thousands and thousands of users and computers, so you might create some kind of an issue. You might even lose it, although you can do a find option from here, but it's easy to lose. So how I like to move it is that you go here and then you go here and then you find the correct OU with which under which you want to move, and you do this and you say okay. So you got the Windows computer here. So now your computers are under the business computer, business users. Honestly speaking, this users OU container rather, which is created by default, and this computers container which is created by default, in most organizations you will find it empty. Okay, so these are the OUs and these are the containers. So that's what that subject wanted us to study. Users and groups. Okay, so we already created a user account. What I'm going to do is just going to create a new user account, and let's say create it under owners, because Sam is our owner, Rita is our owner. So we are going to go ahead and create a user account, Sam. And you don't really have to do, just check what you want to check and don't check what you don't want to check. These checkboxes are pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so this is Sam. The user got created. Let's just quickly look at various properties of Sam. So the general tab, you basically just define the first name, last name. You write a description here. He is the owner of the business. Then this is the office attribute tab. So this is just the address. So in an organization where they have multiple offices, so maybe you will say he is George, George Street, Sydney. So this guy is in George Street City office, because when you have 10,000 users in your Active Directory and you are looking at a user account, you need to know as much as possible from that user account about this user, because you want to find out where this user is sitting. You would like to have his telephone number here. You would like to have his email address here. If there is a web page, an internal web page for this user, or profile page, you would like it to be published here. And it's not that everybody go ahead and manually create this user and put all this information. In fact, most of the organization nowadays nowadays no users are created manually. There is a system which is called as a identity and access management system, which is managed by the HR team of the organization, because it is the HR people who are hiring the people, and HR team maintain the database in their own database, and this identity management system pulls up the information from there, and this identity management system actually creates the user account and he puts all this information here. So all this information gets populated. Again, this is not mandatory information. You saw that I was able to create the user without this information as well, but this is all generic information which you want to have. Again, address is the same thing, generic information if you want to put the guy's address. This is a page where you will go a lot. This is the logon name, the fully qualified logon name of the user, UPN, user principal name, and this is sam@rootdomain.com. And this is the user logon name or the SAM account name. This is root domain /SAM. So the SAM is the SAM account name. Or if this had been the user Ravi, then Ravi is the logon account name. You have these options here, but I hardly have seen any organization using this option. You can set the logon hours for the user. So if you want a user to be able to log into the computers only between a specific time on specific days, you can set that schedule here, both by allowed and denied. Nobody uses it as far as I have seen. Log on to you. I mentioned before that Ravi was having a problem that he can only sit on one PC because his local user account was on that PC only. But with Active Directory, we have solved that issue. Now, all the PCs which are joined to the domain, Ravi can log into any one of those computers. But in certain situation, if you want to limit the users from to be able to log into only a certain computers in your domain, then you can say the following computer for that user, and you can start adding the computers in the list. And once again, not something which I have seen a lot. These are some of the account options where if you want the user to reset the password on the next logon, you can put a check here. If user should not be able to change the password, you can check here. Password never expire, you can check here. You want to disable the account. Smart card interactive logon, Kerberos DES encryption. Once again, some details, things in which I don't want to go right now, but these are various account options which are available. Profile path. So there is something which is called as a roaming profile. Remember I told you that the user's profile is actually stored in this C users, Azure user. That's my profile, and in every PC there is a local folder like this on which the profile is stored. If I go back to the Win10 client which we have, so although Ravi is a domain user, but his profile got created here. He got all these objects. So this is the local profile for Ravi on this computer. But if you want that this folder, instead of getting saved on this computer, should get saved on a network share, so that this folder can move with Ravi on every computer where he logs in, then what you can do is that you can go to this profile path and you can put the path of the file server where you want to put the user profile, and this is an environment variable which I'm using here. Once again, don't want you to get too much in detail of it, but this is something how we configure a user roaming profile. And what's happening here is that the user profile folder, instead of getting saved on a local computer, it is getting saved on a network file share, and user can log into any computer and all his desktop files are going to remain the same, all his my document files are going to remain the same. So that's what roaming profile is for. Logon script. So if there is a script, some kind of a script which you have written which takes certain action, and you want that whenever the user log in, that script should get executed, once again you can put that script on a file share, and you can put the name of that script here, user script .vbs or whatever else script is, or the batch file, and you can put that script here, and when the user logs in, the script will get executed. And you want to create a map drive for the user, so I'm going to create a D drive, and I'm going to set it to a file server. We'll do it later when we set up a file server, but basically if you want to create a network drive for the user automatically when he logs in, you can set it up from here. Telephones, just general information, the number. Organization is general information, number. Remote desktop profile, this is if the user is logging on to a terminal server and you want him to use a specific roaming profile at that time. Only when he's logged into a terminal server, then you put the path here. This is something which I've never used. I'm sure you'll also not use. Attribute editor is once again an easy way to access the ADSI edit. Remember, I showed you ADSI edit and I went into the properties of the user. All these attributes were available there. Once again, not something which you will do if you are not an advanced user, so I'll not go into these details. Security, again, this is an object. You can give people permission on this object. So we'll go into file permissions once again when we go to file shares. So, but you can add the permissions to user object and different kind of objects here. And these are various groups which got created with Active Directory, and they have very deep meanings and they have got very deep rights. I would tell you better not to mess much with this area. Once again, if you want to start a program at logon, you can tell the program name and stuff like that. These are terminal server session settings. I wouldn't go into their details, but for a particular user, if you want to override these settings, you can do that. And these are again remote control settings. If there is a user PKI certificate, then that will show up here. This is one of the useful things. So this is something which you might do very often. User becomes part of security groups to give them access and rights. Okay, so you add the user to the group, or if you want to see what all groups the user is part of, that will show up here. I'm going to create some groups shortly, and I'll show you how to use them. But let's say that you want to make Sam, he's a business owner. He says, I want to be domain admin. I want to be the king of the world. Okay, Sam, you are domain admin. You just added the guy to the domain admin group, and now he is, I have to delete this because this is not letting me save anything. This is just random information which I put there, and member of. So I added him to domain admins, and he says, no, I want to be a bigger admin. So I made him schema admin. Sorry, we haven't spoke about it yet, so we'll speak about the schema admins later, but for now just understand there is another security group which I added him to. So that's what there. Then password replication is something about read-only domain controllers. I will talk to you about that later. And this is where you allow if the password of this user will get replicated to the read-only domain controller or not. Dial-in settings are for VPN access. Once again, let's not get into it. And this is the object of the SAM and general information of the object. I won't go into these details. Basically, when it was created, what is its unique number, but yep, that's it. So that's what a user is all about, and these are the various settings. Once again, I would say that this general is something which you might use. Account is something which you might use. Password replication is if you have a read-only domain controller in your environment, RODC, then you will use, but we haven't spoke about RODC yet, so let's not go into that detail. You might use the user profile path here and user profile path here to set up the roaming profiles and the remote desktop roaming profiles. And this is definitely a place which you will use a lot of times, because you will have to look what groups the user is part of, or you may have to add him to a certain group. Okay, now I'm going to create another OU here, and this I am going to rename as business groups. Once again, this is not the right way to do it. This is not the wrong way to do it. I'm just doing it in a certain way. In most of the cases, businesses will define and decide what kind of OU structure reflects their organizational entity the best. And they will do it that way. If in a certain organization, the sales come under the accounting team, so they will have a OU of sales under the accounting teams. Like they can have it, they can create a OU under here as well. This is all dependent, or let's say if everything has to come under owners, then everybody will be under owners, and that's how it's going to be. So there is nothing right or wrong about it. This has to reflect your business organization, the structure. Now I've created another OU for business groups, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create groups here. In fact, before I go ahead and create the groups, let's go ahead and look at the next module. And let's see what the next module is about. So I explained the users to you. Now the next thing is group. AD groups are used to group user based on the access which they require, and then collectively provide them the required access via the group instead of adding each user to a resource. And there are three kind of groups. So what I'm trying to say is that if there is a folder to which 100 users require the access, and those users are from, let's say, sales. So I have a, don't think about where I'm creating the folder. This won't be like this. This will be on a file server. Let's say there is a sales folder, and there are 100 people in sales team. All these 100 users are created here. User 1, user 2, user 3, user 100. And all of them need access to this folder. So your option is that you go here and you go to security and you say edit, and you add Ravi here, and then you add the user 1 here. I have not created the 100 users here. I hope you will use your imagination. Then you will add user 2 here. Then you will add user 3 here. So you can keep doing that, right? And then if you have 100 users, you would see that how crowded this location is going to look, and this will be pathetic way to do it. Instead of this, what you can do is you go here and you will create a group, and you will call it a sales group, or give it a proper name, sales data share group. You create a group here, and there are three kind of groups. We are going to talk about them, but for now let's just go ahead and create the group. And then you go ahead and add members to this group. You add Ravi to this group, and you add user 1, user 2, and all the users to this group. Okay, so you added all the users to this group. All the users are added to this group. And what do you do here? You go to this folder, and you go to properties, and you go to security, and you go to edit, and you go to add, and you say sales, and this group comes here, and you say okay, give them full control. All right, all done, easy peasy. Now the users can simply go ahead, and if you want to remove somebody, you don't have to come to the folder properties all the time. If the user leaves the organization, you can just go to this group and remove this user from here. You don't have to access each and every resource. Rather, the access is controlled by the groups, and that's what the groups are for. Now, we'll talk about the kind of groups. There are three kind of groups in Active Directory. One is called as a domain local group. Domain local groups are the Windows Server group whose scope is restricted to a specific domain in which they are defined. Domain local groups are used to provide users with access to network resources and to assign permissions to control access these resources. Okay, so there are three kind of groups: domain local, global, and universal. Okay, all three of these groups do pretty much the same job. If you are within like if you have a single domain in your environment, it honestly doesn't matter to you which one you use. In most cases, you will use a global group only. It is when you have a multi-domain, multi-forest kind of an environment where these words of domain, local, and global can become and universal become more meaningful, because these groups can have resources from a certain domain and users from another domain. So in my case, this folder is a resource to which you have added the group, and these users are the members. So a domain global group can have members from its domain and can have resources, can be added to the resources in its domain as well. Whereas a domain local group can have the resources, can have the members from its domain. No, a domain local group can have resources from its domain and the users has to be from the other domain. And the third one is the universal group. The universal groups are most often used to assign permissions to relate resources in multiple domains, and members from any domains can be added. So which means it can have resources from any domain and it can have members from any domain. Also, the universal group to assign permission for access to resources in any domain. Universal security groups are not available in mixed mode. The full feature set of Windows 2000 and later Windows NT operating system only available in native mode. So this mixed mode and native mode is a forest function level thing which I haven't spoke to you about yet, and I'm going to talk to you about it later. But for now, I just want you to understand that when you create a security group, you are given an option that it could be of three kinds. It could be a domain local, it could be a global, and it could be a universal. In 99.9% cases, you will be creating global groups. One more thing, that these domain local and universal, these kind of groups, once again, you will be doing or managing these kind of things when you become like an advanced engineer. These are not the things for today. There are reasons for these groups to be there, and those reasons are exactly the scope in which they can work, which domain they can have resources from, which domain they can have members from. But all these things comes into the picture when you are doing an Active Directory migration between two forest and two domain. Too technical for now. As of now, you can just learn as a interview question that there are three kind of groups: domain, local, global, and universal. There is one more thing which is there, the type of the group. It's a security group or a distribution group. A security group is a group which can be added as a security on a resource, like I'm adding it on a folder, or you add it on a printer or something. A distribution group, on the other hand, is just like an email address distribution group. You have a lot of email addresses in it, and when you send an email to this distribution group, it gets delivered to everybody. From the Active Directory standpoint of view, you will never be doing distribution group. It's only security groups which matters to you. So yeah, let's have a look at the properties of the group. Once again, this is the name of the group, the description of the group. If it's a secure distribution group, you can have an email address for this group. What is the type of the group? The members, one of the most important tab, where who all are the members of this group. Member of, because you can have nested and nested permissions. Let's say that this group is a member, or Ravi is member of this group, and by virtue of this he has access to this folder because this folder has permission on this thing. But what if this group is member of domain admin? If this group is a member of domain admins group, that means all the users who are member of this group are also domain admins. So this is nested grouping. Ravi is member of this group and this group is member of domain admins. So he is via the nested grouping member of domain admins. So this member of tab is also going to be very important. In most of the cases, security groups, membership, and these things, you will not be making a lot of changes, especially if you are going for an entry level job. Your virtue will be limited to the adding members here, and you need to know how to add and remove members. Managed by, again, here you can put the name of a person. This is all informational fields, so to identify who this group belongs to, because in an organization where there are 10,000 groups in Active Directory, you need to know that what is the purpose of each group. And it may sound simple to you today because you're creating 2 groups here, but when there are 10,000 groups in an organization, it becomes a huge hassle, especially to remember after 2 or 3 years of the group being created, that why this group was created and where all this group is provisioned. Because, and for such cases, you add somebody from your company as an owner of that group, and what happens is that whenever we need something, we will go to this user Ravi and we'll say, dude, you have this group in this organization, what is the purpose of this group, because we are going to delete it. So that's what this is about. Object is once again just the Active Directory object location, and security is who has access to this group, not something which you'll do every day. Attribute editor is once again the ADSI edit properties, attribute level properties of this group, not something which you'll be doing every day because these are pretty advanced. And the day you have to do this, I'm sure you will be quite a lot expert in Active Directory already. This is not the first step which you have to take. Okay, so that's what the security groups are about. So we did that. Now let's move on to the DNS. So what we are going to do is just going to show you the basic default Active Directory DNS which got installed, and we joined the client computer to the domain, and already Windows 10 client. So I want to show you the DNS record which got created for it. So once again, the shortcut to open DNS in each computer is dnsmgmt.msc. Let's quickly pop up the DNS for you. Okay, so we discussed the DNS before, I reckon, and inside the DNS there is a forward lookup zone which resolves name to IP addresses, and these 2 zones got created in our Active Directory domain controller by default when we installed Active Directory on it. We have the reverse lookup zone. There is no zone created here. If we want to, we can create a zone, but it is to resolve name from IP addresses. That's something which you rarely want to do, and honestly Active Directory don't depend on it. So if you want, you can create a reverse lookup zone, but otherwise you are fine. If you go under this MSDCS root domain, this is specifically a zone created for your domain controllers, and we will go in more details of these zones in a later section about DNS. And this is the root domain DNS primary zone which is created, rootdomain.com. And remember, my machine which I joined, temp win10, it got joined, it has IP address of 10.0.0.6, and it created a record for itself here. So what is the time here? 5 a.m. What is the time on the machine? 5:47:48 a.m. So this is when we created, joined the machine to the DNS, and the DNS record got created. So yeah, that's what our DNS is. There are a lot of stuff here in the DNS. I am going to tell you a little bit about them, not about all of them, because you really don't need to know all these things. Remember the sites which I created, see the sites are showing up here. Once we do an additional domain control installation and do the sites and services, then I would like to take you through these things as well. But for now, just look at this. This is the first DNS server which got created, and we have our servers already added into it. And this is the PDC. This is the temp win10, and that's how the name resolution is going to happen. Whenever a machine is going to ask, or whenever the temp win10 is going to ask, where is the PDC? The DNS will tell it it's at 10.0.0.7. Or whenever PDC is going to ask, where is this machine temp win10? Because it knows the name, then it's going to say it's 10.0.0.6. So that's what DNS is doing, and that's what Active Directory DNS is. So going back to the training, I just showed you, I didn't show you the PTR record because the reverse lookup zone is not created by default. And I have to create a reverse lookup zone for this. And All right. So this is the reverse lookup zone which got created, and uh, eventually a record will get created for the reverse PTR record here. So we are just going to wait on that for now because it's not going to get created right away. Maybe the next time when we look at it, there will be a PTR record. So that's a reverse lookup zone. Like I said, that it's not very much required for Active Directory functioning, but that's something which we have here. So yeah. So here is what we covered in this module. We told you what is Active Directory. It's a database. We showed you what's Active Directory forest and domains. We also told you about Active Directory forest domains trust. We did the first installation for our domain controller. We looked through the common AD consoles like AD users and computers. We showed you the common Active Directory consoles, the Active Directory users and computers, the Active Directory sites and services, the Active Directory domains, where you can create the trust, etc. I showed you the containers within Active Directory users and computers. I showed you what is a OU, what is a container. I even showed you some advanced features of Active Directory users and computers. Then we created our first user account. I went through the properties of the user account and the things which will be important to you. I showed you the various kind of groups which we can create in Active Directory. Then I showed you Active Directory DNS, what all Active Directory DNS properties are available. So, cool. Okay, so here is your action items for this module. You're going to create your first domain controller. You're going to join your Windows client to your domain as a domain client. You can create multiple user accounts. You can log in with multiple user accounts to the client. And you can also join your file server. You can create a file server, a separate Windows server as your file server, and you can join it to your domain, and you can create some shares on it for sales marketing guys and accounts, etc. And you can add permissions by creating groups in Active Directory, and then you can create map drives from your PCs to the shares. And remember, I showed you in the user properties there is a home folder path. You can also update that there to create a home folder for the users. I'm going to do all this in a separate video to show you how you can do all these things. It will be available in the resources section. Just go through that video, and that will show you how to do all this. And I would like you to complete all these action items because they are going to give you a lot of insight. So thank you so much, guys, for attending this training module, and I hope you learned quite a lot of things. I'll see you in the next module soon. Thank you.